So this is Conscious Café. We both didn't have the processors to make our beautiful cafe background work, but pretend we're in a cafe. So I'm going to start with that really broad question. What does the future of leadership look like?
Well, I would love to be sitting in that cafe that you described, and at least you sent me the background of, and to have the conversation for a number of reasons. One, I'm ready for that next coffee. Two, it would be nice to do something in person that many of us, of course, haven't done for many, many months now. So what does that future of leadership look like? The first thing I'd suggest we would need to do is kind of just step back and think about, well, actually, what are future organizations going to look like? And, for the purposes of this conversation, I might start to imagine those medium or large sized organizations. But I think a lot of this applies to small organizations as well. But organizations clearly are changing hugely, have changed this year, and will continue to change. And I think there are a number of really key trends out there that will then impact what leadership looks like going forward. So I think that organizations are becoming more global, more international, or certainly cross-border. And that may be because they're employing and using employees in different locations, or maybe their employees aren't in different locations, but their customers are. There may still be a handful of organizations that even don't have customers in different parts of the globe. But as we see every week, things that are happening elsewhere in the world impact organizations in their home location. So that globalization theme, I think, is really relevant here to be thinking about that shape of organizations going forward. I think that leads into a whole number of other areas. I think that organizations are becoming more connected. Connection by employees, leadership to employees across organizations. I think there are pieces around the lifespan of organizations now and how long you can expect an organization to last. Two other big themes I'd note: purpose and CSR, terms that we often expect organizations to be on top of and driving forward. We expect that organizations have thought about their purpose because we know that drives talent connection and retention in organizations, and that importance around CSR, so their footprint in the community in which they're operating. Now, how we define leadership, we've got to think through as well. And we may all define leadership slightly differently. So what do we mean when we say leadership? Are we immediately thinking of the CEO of an organization? Or are we thinking of a group of leaders? Or are we thinking of everybody who is impacting in that organization, who has people following them? I'm very much in that third category. There's a broad definition of leadership. And we often can think about leadership and then think of it in the singular, and we think of a leader as opposed to thinking of a leadership team. The world has got more unpredictable, more complex, and no one single person is ever going to have all of those answers. So as we come to what leadership looks like going forward, I think it's far more about team than it ever has been previously. So looking forward, I think there's a people element, there's a kind of technology element, and I think there's that future focus element, all which come into leadership today. So, we've said about this unpredictable world and how we better navigate that. As part of it, I think the expectations of leaders have just continued to climb. We look at individuals in our own organizations and we look across to other organizations, and we expect that leader, she or he, would have the answers and would know the direction. I think it's just an unrealistic expectation, but that's definitely increased. And lastly, I would say, as we're going to start to think about leadership in this context, this focus on inclusion and diversity, it needs to be through absolutely everything that any leadership group, body, whole organization does and is focused on.
Talking about companies going global, whether that's with their talent, because so much has been forced to be digital, that you can be like, who's the best in the world at this versus who's the best in the world that we can get to our city or that is in our city. And it's a very different mindset, and it's a very different way to think about a company, but it's certainly what I'm seeing more and more of. your points about obviously technology and the role it plays. And then, of course, looking at the difference of wants and needs of customers, wants and needs of employees, expectations of both. There's been so much rapid change, which leads me to my next question. How is 2020 going to frame leadership going forward? What differences are we going to see?
This year has been unexpected, hugely challenging, many tragic stories for individuals on a whole variety of fronts that we've seen in 2020. That said, I still think there are some positives and some elements, particularly as you look at organizations, that we have to find a way to bottle and we have to find a way to carry forward. I look at not just our own organization, like others, and the speed at which some decisions were made, organizations pivoted, focused on how to deliver with those changing circumstances this year. It was a level of speed and organization that we just haven't seen, certainly in our own organization and in many others. So how do we keep that focus on reinventing, change, and adaptability going forward? I think 2020 will be seen as an accelerator. I think what this year will do is accelerate us down that path towards those themes and trends that we were just talking about. I don't think it's necessarily creating anything different, but I think it's accelerating. It's accelerating digital transformation in organizations. It's accelerating how we work very differently. It's accelerating how we're connecting across organizations. I think these were trends that were already there. We knew that people could work at home. The technology was there. Did we and many other organizations really leverage that prior to this year? No. No surprise, it does work. So I think we're seeing differences around communication, which I very much hope we keep. I think you'll see across organizations that there's a level of connection and communication from leadership now to individuals that just didn't exist before. This how we work, again, has been accelerated this year. And I think importantly, how we use office space. What's the role of the office in the future? You were just rightly talking about, as you think about talent, that talent pool in many ways has just opened up because it matters less where I'm based. We're going to have to think about how we connect and collaborate with people, and some FaceTime and in-person times can still be important.
And you're coming from law, like that is not known for its agility and speed, and certainly values the office space. So how has this changed within Dentons? Like, how have you adapted to this, and what do you think is going to stick?
So that shift to virtual and remote working was largely seamless. And as I think back on this year, we have an office in Wuhan in China, along with 44 other offices in China. So we've really seen this, the impact of the pandemic hit right across our organization, and that shift to virtual and remote working. A lot of that was seamless, one, because the technology was already there for us. Although people were in offices, they were used to working with teams on cross-border transactions, or they might be sitting in London or Edinburgh working with people in Paris or in Vancouver. So they were kind of used to that. So that shift worked well. I think part of the challenge that we're definitely seeing is what I've talked about internally. How do you ensure that you keep giving people the context that's important for them to operate in their role? By context, I mean, whether I'm sitting with my direct team or not in an office, there are others in my organization around me. There are things that I kind of pick up on that are happening. I drop off this Zoom call and I can speak with a colleague. That context has disappeared. So we've got to think about that context piece. So I think what we will see is us using office space differently. Now, I don't think that will mean that come March 2021, we won't have any offices or they suddenly look different, not least because we know there's leases in place and this takes some time to kind of redesign the space. But I think that shift is now with us for good. That shift in terms of how we're going to bring people together to connect, and that will be a difference.
And one of the other things that you said, and I'm seeing so much in my own role, having personal conversations with leaders and them being frank and being like, I'm being looked at right now to lead in something I have no idea what I'm getting into. There's such a great level of fear and uncertainty for themselves, and then having to lead people through that. How have you been managing that, whether it's personally or as a company, or have you heard of different ways of kind of framing this out and supporting leaders in that way during this time?
I think this year has really amped up the level of kind of uncertainty and unpredictability around me as a leader, a leadership team, a group leading any organization, because none of us expected this and the speed and the shift. But I think it was there anyway over the last however many years. There were changes and we were still doing what we used to do before. This year has brought that into sharp focus. And it's got 3 parts: holding the organization, narrating, and then co-creating. So this role as a leader initially, to hold things together, the change is hitting, and the role you play, bringing a degree of that stability. Secondly, then actually narrating and telling the story, and we know how powerful stories are. So to be able to put it in that context. And then thirdly, the importance on the word but co-creating the future. So together working through, well, what will look different? How are we going to connect? How are we going to use office space? How are we going to collaborate in a world that has definitely shifted? And we talk to leaders about, you're not going to go through those 3 stages in a linear process. You might start to stabilize, move to narrating, and find yourself back at stabilizing. I was mentioning to you earlier, and many of you might know, is the case in many parts of the globe, but the UK or England has gone into its 2nd national lockdown as of last night. So again, that shifted. I look back over the last couple of months and the conversations we were having in organizations, that shifted back again for the next month. We tried to help leaders think through that the role they play is not to have the answer. The role they play is perhaps in those 3 stages, but also we've emphasized not just the communication point, but the listening point. And that's come up for other reasons this year, but actually taking time to listen, but listening to understand those concerns or thoughts from team members right around the firm. And that can be so powerful. The opportunity to be heard. Not only am I likely to share some useful thoughts, but actually then kind of lowers the negative impact in organizations. So 3 stages, and that listening piece has very much been where we focus to address what you've rightly raised.
And is there a level of transparency that's more important now? Like, I think it's always important, but I'm thinking of a leader not knowing the answer and just being able to really honestly communicate that to, like, I'm not sure what's going to happen. I can't give you all the answers, but here's what we do know. This is what we're doing to think through it, or whatever that communication is.
Definitely. To be able to bring the individuals across an organization with you as a leadership team, a leadership group, having taken that time to understand, having been very honest, empathizing with those colleagues around you, is all part of leadership. So those skills that are going to become even more critical are all around judgment, and they're around that humanness.
It's going to be how humans interact with technology. So, like, what can we bring to the table that technology can't? And of course, it's that empathy, humanism. And then you think of something like law. When you're dealing with clients, you want to be able to have that and to have those honest conversations to be able to provide solutions. So it's more important than ever. And I've heard somebody say, the person your parents taught you to be is going to become more important in the future of work than ever before, right? Because it is those skills. So what other things, what other capabilities and skills should people be working on for that future of work? And no pressure for you as a parent, but you're teaching your kids how to be great leaders right now.
Yes. I might not share that here at home. So that really does resonate. So look, I think what I'd add to it are probably skills in a similar area. So you hear this word humanness come to the fore, which again kind of links what we've just been talking about, social connectedness, and whether you were just saying rightly, with our clients, how we build that connection. But I think it's as important internally, and how we're building that connection with teams and individuals that are more global, are more flexible in how they work, more remote from a kind of central hub where people would have been seen face to face. Do want to feel and understand the purpose of that organization and what we're focused on, coming back to that social connectedness, that empathy. It's about how we build trust as leaders going forward. And it links back to that point around transparency that you've also hit on. We're also seeing, in research and literature, that shifting and bringing in this. Someone we've worked with has talked about AQ, the adaptability quotient. So thinking about how we as individuals are set up and engage in change and adapting moving forward. I like that word adapting, and I've started to move away from using this word resilience. At least our own firm. Resilience is exactly what we've been talking about for many months. And I agree with all that's behind it. But it partly, for me, engenders this, if I can be resilient and get through the next month, then everything will go back to normal. Lockdown will be lifted and go back to the office. It's okay. I think the elements are right. But this maybe helping individuals, organizations, and leaders shift their thinking to be about adapting. I need to keep adapting because things around me are going to keep changing.
So I would love to hear, because it keeps coming up, and I know that you're passionate about this as well, is that connection piece, the human connections from the internal and external team. So is there something you can share from what you guys have been doing at Denton's?
Every Thursday, we've been running a very different type of session, which you kindly have participated in with us, Lisa, where we've brought people together from right across our firm. So this connection piece, individuals are now having the opportunity to meet others that they never would have met before.
I think that's one of the great things. It's the flattening of the world that it's created.
Absolutely. So that keeping that sort of connection, that's a real positive. That will stay for us, and something we've really realized this year, even when we revert or evolve into what offices look like going forward. I think that in terms of a playbook on some of these things, I reflect on this year. There wasn't actually a playbook for how to manage a pandemic situation in organizations that we've had to evolve and create. In terms of that pivot, perhaps from one field to another, what I would say, both from my experience in our organization and what we look at, some of those historic barriers and those expectations really have shifted. So not only have we seen this kind of shift in where we're looking for and bringing on talent into the firm, that actually the skill sets and some of those requirements look different. So the fact that individuals may have self-taught, self-learned, as long as there's demonstration behind that and that commitment to that pivot into the new field.
And you're seeing it across organizations too, where they're no longer requiring an undergrad, like not in law, you still need a law degree, but like in other fields where they're saying, no, like we want to hire the best people, and how they've learned, they need to have learned, but how they've done it is not as important. And knowing what a self-learning requires, putting a little emphasis on that as well, versus a traditional undergrad or an education does. So I think that that's a global shift to looking at things very differently.
What we're seeing in organizations now is a far greater focus on well-being and employee health. I think that it will be with us now, which is a good thing. We've seen different sectors focus on mental health and mental well-being far more. We've seen it in the legal sector and wider professional services. So I think that well-being focus is with us generally as organizations. That's going to be an imperative for leaders moving forward, that there's a well-being strategy as part of how they're looking out for employees. And that'll be expected. Is there an expectation about empathy? Yes, 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 absolutely. And it goes to that I think, what's going to differentiate organizations that I want to work for going forward, successful organizations going forward. I think it's going to be those leadership teams, leaders in the broadest sense, that demonstrate higher emotional intelligence as part of that, self-awareness, self-management, capabilities around empathy.
And it's something that I think there's been just a magnifying glass put on this year. So like people have always had that wellness kind of conversation in the background. And they're like, oh, this is actually like we've talked a lot about performance or productivity or how mental well-being is going to encourage engagement. All these things have been conversations, but this year they're like, it is front and center. And I don't think that's going to fully shift back. I do think that that's going to be a conversation in my world, having much more honest conversations that I've ever had with both team members that I'm leading and with other leaders, which I think and hope that continues, and seeing a shift in emotional intelligence in leaders, which is absolutely incredible. But it comes down to the person your parents made you and the skill training they gave you. And then absolutely all of these things are trainable things. They're things that we can build on and that we should seek education, but experience and look to mentors and leaders on how they're doing things, and how they got there, and having those conversations. Because what I've been able to experience is, this didn't come naturally. This is how I tripped and stumbled my way to here. And this is my learnings from those experiences, which can go so far when it comes to emotional intelligence and within the work setting, particularly on how to get there.
The opportunity for roles, I think, has opened up. Maybe in the short term, that's still challenging as organizations are dealing with the current impact. But that opportunity for roles has opened up because people have really understood and leveraged remote working. So it doesn't matter where I'm based. I don't need to be in London for a London-based role going forward. And we're seeing that in lots of countries where there's a movement out of some big cities because they see they're going to spend less time in a physical office. And something that we worry about and have talked about internally is that this has been a very difficult year on a whole number of fronts for many, many individuals. And as part of that kind of frustration, perhaps some of that disconnection, we worry that individuals may think that a route out of it is to switch employers. So we worry about losing talent for the wrong reasons. I think that people may suspect that it's different or better somewhere else, when I'm not sure it would be. It will be different on some degree for sure. But I think we worry about losing talent because of this challenging year, and that may then enable people to move. So maybe those two themes do lead to, at least over the next 12, 18, 24 months, perhaps more competition, which for me just amplifies why it's even more important to build that connection. We've had leaders and we've been pushing them now on a regular basis to ensure that there is those regular, no agenda check-in calls.
Well, and it's easier to leave a job. It's hard to leave a relationship. So if you truly believe that your company, more than likely your direct managers, really care about you beyond the job, that's where it becomes more challenging to skip around. And that's why it becomes more important, of course, internally to do.
I think that diversity has to be part of the business strategy, period. And that's exactly where we are as Dantons. It's yes, of course, it's in our DNA and who we are, but it's part of our business strategy. It's in our goal because we recognize the importance of it. I hope that organizations are beyond talking about the value of diversity. We should have got that 10 years ago or long before that. So it actually is in our business goal as a firm, driving diversity of teams, and also, of course, because our clients expect it. And I think we're seeing a lot more of that today, and that push from clients, so the outside in, as well as, of course, is expected by our talent in the firm and the talent that we're seeking to attract. So that has to be part, I think, of any business strategy. And when we were talking at the start there, Lisa, inclusion and diversity need to run through everything that a leader is doing, and that is a difference. So again, as part of it, and I would weave it into some of this emotional intelligence focus and the people focus, inclusive leadership and those traits of an inclusive leader, and again, ensuring that we're measuring those and putting some real focus behind it.
And I think you made a really good point. It should be part of who you are. It should just be how we do things here. And I think it's becoming more and more transparent of companies that have thrown money at it or provided some training versus having it integrated into the company for their employees, and then certainly reflecting on the public, however they're dealing with the public.
I mean, the one thing I'd add that we've done differently this year here, I would say, is, of course, we were measuring diversity across the firm. Of course, we were taking actions. But actually this year, after the killing of George Floyd, we had a lot of internal discussion and paused as a leadership group and proactively engaged in a series of listening exercises and listening in small group conversations with our global CEO, plus me, and then at least 10 people in each of these sessions, and to understand what's the lived experience in our organization. And there were things that were shared that individuals have never shared before. There were things that sadden me, disappoint me, that happen in our organization. And I suspect that's the same in many other places. So the importance as part of this focus on D&I to really understand not only the numbers and what steps you're taking, but actually that lived experience in your own organization, and use that to inform the next steps that absolutely need to be taken with that commitment and conviction.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so, so much.